There are compliments that don't warm, they sting. Words that come wrapped in admiration but carry an undertone of discomfort, jealousy, or hidden comparison. You're doing so well. I just hope it lasts. It sounds kind, but the energy vibrates with uncertainty, not celebration. These phrases are not about you, they're about the other person's silent battle with their own limitations. Sometimes, the compliment is a disguised competition, a subtle way of saying, "You've moved ahead, and I'm not okay with that." It's not always conscious, but it's real. The nervous laughter, the awkward body shift, the hesitation before clapping. Their system isn't rejecting your success, it's being triggered by their own sense of inadequacy. This is the kind of energy that confuses the heart. You want to celebrate, but you feel like you have to defend your happiness. And in trying to shrink your joy to avoid discomfort, you end up carrying guilt for simply having crescido. Your light becomes uncomfortable not because it is too bright, but because it reveals the dimmed flame in someone else. It's not your fault, but it is your reality. Some words arrive dressed in care but carry the weight of quiet sabotage. "I'm just worried about you getting disappointed. Don't forget where you came from." These phrases don't support, they anchor. They are spoken not from love, but from fear. Fear that your expansion will leave someone behind. Fear that your happiness will expose their stagnation. It's the kind of disguised kindness that gently pulls your vibration down, like someone softly pressing your shoulders when you try to stand taller. You're not being attacked, but you're not being uplifted either. You are being contained, subtly, silently. This form of energy is difficult to identify because it comes with a smile. But the body feels it. Your chest tightens, your mind doubts, your joy hesitates. You begin to second-guess your own radiance. Behind these words often hides an unconscious desire that you stay small enough to still fit into someone else's story, that your flight doesn't make them confront their own cages. Not everyone who smiles at your success is rooting for you, and not every expression of concern is grounded in care. Some are simply dressed in emotional camouflage. There is a particular kind of ache that emerges when joy is met with indifference. When you finally achieve something that once felt impossible, and the people you thought would celebrate with you respond with silence, sarcasm, or a lukewarm, "That's nice." They were present during your pain. They offered support when you were broken. But now, whole and rising, you find yourself alone. This is one of the most subtle betrayals, to be held through your suffering, but abandoned in your healing. You start to notice it when the dynamic shifts. The phone rings less. The conversations turn colder. The encouragement that once flowed freely now arrives delayed, hesitant, or not at all. It's not that they don't care. It's that your evolution disturbs a balance they unconsciously relied on. Your healing takes away their role. Your light disorients the relationship's foundation. Some people loved you because you were broken, not because they're bad, but because your wounds made them feel needed, important, secure. Now that you're stepping into your power, you are no longer a mirror of their struggle. You no longer validate their emotional framework. And that makes them uncomfortable. Sometimes even angry. Not because of what you've done, but because of what you no longer reflect. It's painful to realize that not all love is unconditional. That some attachments depend on you staying in familiar pain. But this awareness is not cruelty, it is clarity. And clarity, though cold, is freeing. There's something quietly devastating about realizing that some people are only close to you when you are hurting. When you're crying, they show up. When you're lost, they listen. When you're struggling, they comfort you. But the moment you begin to rise, not perfectly, but steadily, their presence begins to fade. Their energy becomes distant. Their words change tone. It's a subtle disappearance. A quiet fading. They don't argue with your growth. They just step back. Not because they stopped caring, but because your transformation no longer fits the emotional rhythm they were used to dancing with. You, in joy, don't play the same melody they once found familiar. Your smile feels like static to their old emotional wiring. And in that dissonance, they retreat. Not out of cruelty, but out of discomfort. Your healing invites them to heal too, and not everyone is ready to answer that call. Some prefer the safety of your sadness, because they felt useful. There, they recognized themselves. There, they didn't have to confront the parts of themselves still stuck, still afraid, still holding on to pain they've never dared to name. When you start shining, not everyone will clap. Some will flinch. Some will fall silent. Some will smile politely, but their eyes will betray them. It's not because your light is too much. It's because your light reminds them of what they haven't yet dared to become. And that kind of reflection can feel violent to an identity built around wounds. This can leave you confused, maybe even guilty. You might ask yourself, did I change too much? But that question is often born from old conditioning. The belief that your worth is tied to how well you can remain small, palatable, non-threatening. But your soul didn't come here to be digestible. It came to be whole. And wholeness requires breaking patterns, even the ones that once looked like love. Especially the ones that demanded your suffering as proof of connection. So, if you're feeling the weight of others pulling away as you rise, know this: you are not losing people. You are shedding layers of old resonance. You are outgrowing cages that once felt like comfort. And that's not betrayal. That's evolution. It's easy to imagine that negativity comes from enemies, from people who openly wish you harm. But often, the most draining energy doesn't arrive through confrontation. It slips in quietly, masked by shared memories and invisible contracts signed in silence. These are not enemies. They are people who once sat with you in your pain, who helped you survive when survival was all you had. And without a word, you made an unspoken agreement. We stay here in this frequency. Together. That agreement was never verbalized. But it shaped the energy between you. They were there when you were unsure, fragile, uncertain. They held you, but they also needed you to stay held. Because as long as you didn't rise, they didn't have to question why they hadn't. Your pain gave them comfort, not because they were cruel, but because it made them feel connected, needed, and safe. Then you began to change. You started to want more. To feel more. To heal. To rise. And slowly, the energetic agreement began to crack. Not with arguments. Not with dramatic exits. But with tension. With avoidance. With passive resistance that feels like guilt, like confusion, like, why don't I feel supported anymore? It's because you broke the contract. You stepped out of the vibrational room you once shared. You stopped repeating the same emotional dialogue. You shifted from survival to creation. And that shift, though sacred, threatens the emotional security of those still anchored in the old story. It challenges their narrative. It activates their pain. This is why so many negative energies don't feel like attacks. They feel like confusion, like weight, like a subtle pressure trying to bring you back to a place that no longer fits. These aren't just emotions, they're frequencies being exchanged without words. A field of emotional gravity pulling you toward familiar suffering. Bruce Lipton speaks of how the environment shapes the expression of our potential. These emotional contracts are part of that environment. They influence not just our behavior, but our biology, our chemistry, our manifestation field. When you start to exit that field, you're not just changing your life. You're disrupting an inherited system. And it's in this disruption that the real test begins. Can you love without needing to stay energetically entangled? Can you honor your past while refusing to be imprisoned by it? Can you hold compassion for those still stuck without allowing them to anchor your flight? This is not about rejection. It's about energetic integrity. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for yourself and for them, is to evolve, even if it breaks the contract. Because your healing, if chosen freely, will one day become a lighthouse. But first, it might feel like betrayal to those who never expected you to leave the storm. Sometimes what hurts the most isn't what is said, but what isn't. A victory met with silence. A personal milestone greeted with a blank expression. A life change, big, sacred, deeply earned, followed by avoidance. No questions asked. No words offered. Just absence. And it lingers. It stays in the room like an unanswered question. At first, you may try to justify it. Maybe they're busy. Maybe they didn't know what to say. But deep down, you feel it. It's not about time. It's not about confusion. It's about vibration. Your frequency shifted, and theirs didn't. And instead of rising with you, They chose to pull back, to watch from the distance, to withhold the connection that once felt so natural. Silence, in these moments, isn't neutral. It becomes a message, a statement. It says, "I don't know how to meet you where you are now." It says, "Your light unsettles something in me I don't want to face." And the pain it brings isn't just about the words that never came. It's about the realization that your growth became a dividing line. We are taught to fear conflict, but few things are more painful than silent distance. It creates a vacuum, a space where old connection used to live, now empty. And that space echoes. It makes you question your joy. It makes you question your belonging. It makes you question if becoming more means becoming alone. But that silence is not rejection. It's resonance in motion. It's the universe realigning your field. It's the shedding of dynamics that were only sustained by shared shadows. And as hard as it is to face, some silences are sacred. Some absences are guidance. Some endings are releases wrapped in grief. To rise, sometimes you must be willing to be misunderstood. To walk alone for a time. To hold your joy with both hands, even when no one claps. Even when the silence is deafening. Even when the people you thought would walk with you suddenly forget how to take the next step. But know this, the silence is not empty. It's making space. And in that space, life will place new voices. Ones that celebrate without envy, support without conditions, and speak with hearts wide open. Long before a word is spoken, the body already sabe. It senses the tension in a jaw that tightens as you speak of something good. It notices the arms crossed, the averted eyes, the sudden change of subject. It hears what the mouth tries to hide, the discomfort with your joy, the uneasiness with your alignment, the silent wish that you weren't doing quite so well. We often want to believe what people say, especially when they say it with a smile. But energy doesn't lie. And the nervous system knows when something is off. You feel it in your chest, in your gut, in the way your joy suddenly contracts after a conversation that was supposed to be light. It's not paranoia. It's perception. Joe Dispenza teaches that the heart emits a magnetic field that extends beyond the body. And that field is constantly reading, receiving, decoding. You're not imagining things. Your inner system is interpreting frequencies. And sometimes, the most painful realizations come from these silent transmissions. It's when someone celebrates you with words but their tone feels hollow. When they ask about your success but their eyes dim as you speak. When every story you share seems to trigger a comparison, a distancing, a subtle edge of sarcasm or doubt. These aren't coincidences. They are energetic clashes. Your coherence, the alignment between who you are and how você vive, creates dissonance in those who are still fragmented. And in that dissonance, the truth reveals itself not in what is said, but in what is felt. This kind of perception is sacred. It's your soul's way of protecting its field, of helping you see beyond appearances. But it's also lonely, because once you start noticing, you can't unsee. Once you feel it, you can't unknow. And the question becomes, will you keep ignoring your body's wisdom just to preserve the illusion of connection? Or will you honor the subtle, powerful truth that the body always speaks first, and that energy, more than words, is what tells you who's really walking with you? There are moments when someone offers support, not because they want to see you grow, but because they're uncomfortable with how much you've already grown. It sounds like concern. It looks like advice. But beneath the surface, what's really being offered is an invitation to return to the familiar version of yourself, the one that didn't shine quite so much. You've changed a lot. Just be careful not to lose yourself. You seem different. Are you sure this path is really right for you? I'm only saying this because I care. It's subtle. It's coded in love. But it carries a quiet urgency, an energetic pull backward. Because your expansion no longer confirms their narrative of who you were. And instead of expanding with you, they offer resistance disguised as guidance. Not because they are bad, but because they are afraid. Afraid that your transformation leaves them behind. Afraid that your light exposes the parts of them still dimmed. There's a psychology behind this. The human brain craves consistency, not just in itself, but in its relationships. When someone you love grows beyond the limits of the story you shared, The brain interprets it as instability. It triggers a defense response. One that says, pull them back, ground them, remind them who they were. But what they really mean is, remind them of the version of themselves that made me feel safe. And so, they call it advice. They call it humility. But energetically, what's happening is an attempt to keep you tethered to the old field. A silent negotiation that says, you can rise, but not too much. You can shine, but don't forget the darkness we once shared. This is where you must choose, with love, but with clarity. Choose to continue even if the validation disappears. Choose to trust your own inner compass when others try to recalibrate it to fit their comfort. Choose to keep going, even if the ones who once walked beside you now seem lost in your light. Growth doesn't always feel like being lifted. Sometimes it feels like outgrowing hands that. There's a moment, often invisible, often unspoken, when your presence stops being neutral. When the light you carry begins to trigger something in those around you. Not because you said too much. Not because you changed who you are. But because simply being you, in alignment, becomes too confronting for someone still living out of alignment with themselves. It starts subtly. A shift in tone. A glance that lingers too long. A pause after your success is mentioned. You might not even notice it at first. But your body does. Your heart does. Because the comparison has entered the room, not from you, but through them. They are now measuring your freedom against their fear, your clarity against their confusion, your rise against their stagnation. And it's not just emotional, it's vibrational. A field of resistance begins to form. Not out of malice, but out of internal conflict. Your expansion becomes a mirror that reflects back everything they've avoided, the dreams they've postponed, the truths they've suppressed, the light they've forgotten how to touch. The pain isn't yours, but it lands on you. Because the energy of comparison is heavy. It distorts conversations. It creates invisible walls. And it makes you feel like you have to shrink to stay safe, to stay loved, to stay familiar. But comparison is never about the person being observed. It's about the observer's relationship with their own potential. And when someone is at war with themselves, they often externalize that conflict, turning your radiance into an accusation, your evolution into an offense. This is where many people begin to self-sabotage. Not because they lack confidence, but because they unconsciously try to preserve the emotional proximity of those they fear losing. They dim. They downplay. They delay. All in the name of staying relatable. But your soul didn't come here to be a mirror for other people's comfort. Your light is not a threat. It is an invitation. Not everyone will accept it, but those who do will rise with you, not against you. Comparison is a distortion of connection. And the only cure is remembering, your path is sacred. Your frequency is sovereign. And your worth is not up for debate in someone else's unfinished story. There is a moment in every soul's journey when evolution begins to feel like betrayal. Not because you've done anything wrong, but because your expansion no longer fits the emotional architecture of who you used to be, or the agreements you unconsciously made while living in pain. These were contracts sealed in silence, signed through shared wounds, encoded in the spaces where you once felt safe. They were not written with words. They were forged in glances, in late-night confessions, in codependencies disguised as loyalty. They said, we'll stay broken together. We'll not outgrow each other. We'll remain here, where love means sacrifice and growth feels like abandonment. And then, something shifted. You healed. You chose peace. You began to walk with less weight, to speak with more clarity, to breathe without asking permission. And suddenly, the very people who once felt like home began to pull away. Not with cruelty, but with confusion. Because the version of you they were bonded to no longer exists. This is the emotional rupture that rising often brings. You didn't leave them, you just stopped living inside the version of yourself they needed to recognize. And your presence, once familiar, now feels foreign. Your joy, once welcomed, now feels threatening. Your alignment, once admired, now feels like an echo of everything they've refused to face. And so, some will try to remind you of your old self, not to help you remember, but to bring you back. Some will ask questions that feel like guilt. Some will weaponize your growth by calling it arrogance or disconnection. But beneath it all is grief. Grief for the emotional contract they thought would never expire. But your soul came here for truth, not loyalty to pain. And sometimes, love means honoring the contract that matters most, the one between you and your own becoming. You are not being rejected. You are being recalibrated. You are not being left behind. You are being aligned. The loneliness you feel is not emptiness, it's spaciousness. It's the sacred vacuum that always precedes a new frequency. As Bruce Lipton teaches, we don't just inherit biological patterns, we inherit emotional blueprints. And breaking those patterns doesn't just change your life. It changes the field. The entire field. Your healing is not selfish. It is disruptive, yes, but it is also holy. So if the path ahead feels quiet, know this, you're not lost. You're in the silence between identities. You're not alone. You're in the sacred pause between contracts. You're not abandoned. You're being resent. Like Joe Vitale once said, you are a radio signal, and not everyone is tuned to your station. That doesn't make your music wrong. It makes it rare. And remember, your light was never meant to be dimmed just because others are still adjusting their eyes. It was meant to guide. Even if, at first, it blinds. Even if it offends. Even if it walks alone. You are not here to convince. You are here to embody. Not everyone will understand your path, but the ones who vibrate in truth will find you. And when they do, you won't have to explain a thing. Because they'll see your light, and instead of retreating, they'll recognize their own.